So which Notre Dame quarterback has the edge after Saturday's spring game? And which players earned themselves some playing time in the fall? Plus, we know Nico Iamaleava isn't coming to Notre Dame, but his decision to leave Tennessee could still shake up the Irish quarterback room. Luke Smith is back on the show to help break it all down next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018. Now I'm a producer at Fox Sports, and it is great to have you here with me on Tuesday, April 15th. And thanks for making this your first listen of the day. I'd also really appreciate it if you subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you might be tuning in today. And this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, we got a fun one in store for you today. Luke Smith is back on the show. My former co-host and longtime friend joins me to break down everything we saw during the Blue Gold game on Saturday, from the quarterback competition to the performances that will actually matter heading into the 2025 season. We're also going to hit on some big picture takeaways now that spring ball is about to wrap up this week. Then we're going to close out the show by discussing the wild situation involving now former Tennessee quarterback Nico Iamaleava, his decision to transfer, and why Tennessee could come calling for one of Notre Dame's quarterbacks. Also worth noting, the Irish landed two big-time commitments on the recruiting trail in the past couple days. 4-star interior offensive lineman Gregory Patrick and 3-star wide receiver Bubba Frazier made their commitments official. Add in 5-star defensive end Rodney Dunham from last week, and that is 3 commitments in the span of 5 days for the Irish, if you are keeping track. Marcus Freeman and his staff are riding a wave of momentum on the recruiting trail right now, and I don't expect that to end anytime soon. But I'm going to save the recruiting talk for tomorrow's episode, so make sure you tune into that. And for now, let's bring in Luke for our final thoughts on the Blue Gold game. All right, Luke, you and I have known each other for a long time, and one thing that I've learned about you is that you would never, ever overreact about anything, but especially sports, and even more specifically, the first half of a spring game. So when I saw that you tweeted, quote, first half of Blue Gold game, gut reaction, Notre Dame is going to win the national championship, I knew you were being completely serious. So should we book our plane tickets to Miami now or later based off what you saw on Saturday?
You're right. I wouldn't overreact. That's just my gut reacting, and that is what my gut said after watching about 8 minutes of scrimmage football in Notre Dame Stadium on April 12th. So, yeah, I think probably get a pretty good fare on that right now for late January. So may as well get on it while you can.
That was a hilarious reaction. What's funny is that was right around the time where CJ Carr was just dialing it up. Like, starts out 10 of 12, feels so good. You and I are texting each other on the side, and I'm like, he kind of needs to cool off, or one of these guys needs to really step up here, because it felt at that point in time like when Sam Hartman came out and just dominated in that spring game in 2023, and Tyler Buckner could not even complete a pass. Now, Kenny Minchey and Steve Angeli both finished strong. So, you know, we're going to obviously talk a lot about the quarterback competition today, but it was a really impressive performance by all the quarterbacks, I would say. And the rest of the roster, like, not every spring game is built the same. Certainly, I actually thought this was pretty entertaining, despite the fact that the scoring system made pretty much zero sense.
The scoring system did not make sense. I should also note that the tweet that I had about the first half of the Blue Gold game really wasn't even accurate, because they played 3 periods as opposed to 2 halves or 4 quarters. But I agree, it was entertaining, and maybe part of that is because a lot of schools around the country aren't even doing spring games anymore. I think that this offense versus defense format, despite the scoring discrepancies or problems with the scoring, actually makes you pretty entertaining, because it's good on good. You're not splitting up the talent equally, so to speak, between blue and gold. And I think all we had heard this spring was that this was a really loaded and talented team at a lot of positions. And I think that showed a lot on Saturday when you think about it, a lot of Notre Dame's top players weren't even playing, and there was still high-level talent all over the field.
Yeah, as I was watching that, it did make me think about all the schools who got rid of their spring games. And I was just thinking, like, is that really necessary? You know, now, granted, Notre Dame did come out of this unscathed, which has not always been the case in the past. I mean, Jabron Payne tore his ACL in last year's spring game, and Logan Diggs hurt his shoulder a few years ago in the spring game as well. But Notre Dame didn't suffer any injuries, which is obviously probably the biggest story of
That
this
we've heard
game.
of.
Yeah, that's true, because the Logan Diggs thing didn't come out until like weeks after the fact. But I thought the way that they structured it, going offense to defense, was way more entertaining than when they do the draft and they basically split it up, because then you're dealing with like this workshopped offensive line that doesn't really make sense. And that was kind of the case in this game because some guys were sitting out and stuff. But I thought it was really entertaining, and I was really impressed with what I saw from all the guys. Like, Notre Dame had the 2s and 3s out there at one point, and it'd be like a guy like Ben Minnick would make a play and be like, man, he's not even threatening to get any sort of real playing time, at least not right now. And he's out there and he looks like a real college football player. So I was really pleased with what I saw on Saturday, but I think it sort of was a great stamp for spring practice overall, because the reports out of South Bend have been just overwhelmingly positive.
They really have been. And the way that this team is spoken about feels different, as if they're, truly that talented. And I think that that's significant. Just going off my own reaction, this is normally the time of year where, spring highlights are fun to look at, but I don't really want to think about the team a whole lot at this time of the year because there's too much thought that's put into this from, in last year's case, August to January. But I'm excited to see this team get out there. Like, I wish you're at August 31st already, to be honest. I'm going to enjoy the summer, but if Notre Dame had a game tomorrow, I'd be pretty excited about it just based on the way that they've been spoken about this spring.
That is the most disappointing part in all of this. You're like, all right, great. We get to see Notre Dame play football. Now we're going to have to wait 5 more months before they take the field. And Notre Dame gave very limited access to this spring practice. The media saw basically one full practice, that Jersey scrimmage, the week prior to the spring game. So it was great for the fans to kind of see what this team looks like. But now we wait. And during that waiting time, you know what we're going to do? We're going to speculate about the quarterbacks until we have some actual news to talk about, whether that's Marcus Freeman announcing the starter or one of these guys enters his name in the transfer portal. But there's a lot to dissect from this game. So what stood out most about each guy?
I think that this game really showcased well just who each guy is. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way at all in any respect. Even though Kenny Minchey had worse passing completion percentage than either Angeli or Carr, you saw him with some electricity, just fitting the ball into tight windows. Also was hurt by a couple drops, or an instance where I thought like Will Pauling gave up on one route as well. And then you can see his legs a little bit too, where he's got an athleticism that neither of the other two guys have. So that high level ceiling is definitely there. CJ Carr separated himself, I thought, from the other two. And that's what really, I think, a lot of Notre Dame fans have been hoping for years, for any quarterback, especially one that's homegrown, to show up like that. And we saw him play this well in the spring game last year too. And then Steve Angeli was kind of just himself, steady, picking up yards, hitting checkdowns, short yardage passes, and just keeping the offense moving. I thought that in a lot of ways they all played to what we all think of as their respective ceilings, or at least showed flashes of what their ceilings could be.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think CJ Carr had the best day overall. Statistically, Kenny Minchey had the worst, but based on the eye test, I don't think that was the case at all. I don't think he was that far behind Carr for the reasons you mentioned. He had a couple plays that didn't go his way that I don't think were his fault, and he looks really shifty with the ball in his hands. He made a good decision early on, ran for a first down, and made some nice passes as well. So it's going to be a very difficult decision for Marcus Freeman, and I thought the most telling thing out of the entire spring practice, not just the Jersey scrimmage, not just the spring game, but like every single quote that has happened over the course of the past month, when Marcus Freeman said that they need to go into fall camp with 2 quarterbacks, like that tells you kind of where his head's at. We had all kind of expected that to be the case, but for him to come out there and say that right after the game, I think is very telling. And now him, Mike Denbrock, Gino Guidugli, like they've got a very difficult decision to make.
They do, and it makes you wonder what sort of conversations have been had already in the background, even leading up to that scrimmage, because it felt like it's a true, legit, open competition. But it's a little unique because, of course, there were 3 practices after the spring game on Saturday, too. So you wonder almost at what point do they have that conversation with those 3 quarterbacks, with the portal opening on Wednesday, the 16th, I believe. And I think it's only open for like a week too, if I recall correctly. But yeah, it's definitely something we all expected. They weren't going to go into the fall with 3 quarterbacks. I think that would have been, frankly, ridiculous. not only because I think each of these guys probably deserves a chance to play somewhere, but also because Notre Dame brought in a general manager this year and Mike Martin, who probably thinks it's not wise to pay three guys who will all command a pretty penny at the quarterback position. You want to make sure that that budget is being spent effectively. So that's another piece of this that you have to take into consideration as well. And I think, another reason why come next week, we're probably going to have two legit guys still in this race.
So how do you think this plays out? Do you think that Marcus Freeman has a discussion with each one of these quarterbacks at the end of spring and just says, hey, it's you and someone else, and someone has to be told that they came in third after the spring, and then they make the decision? Or do you think it's like just on one of these players, they're going to look around, they're going to recognize the situation, and they just kind of take it upon themselves to enter their name in the transfer portal? Because I do think that the Nico Iamaleava situation at Tennessee, not that he's going to come over to Notre Dame. That's definitely not going to happen. We'll talk more about this later on in the show. But I do think that's going to lead to a domino effect with more quarterback movement, and Notre Dame could end up involved somehow. But I do think that after this spring, it is probably going to be down to two. I kind of entertained the idea that maybe all three would come back as recently as last week. But now with this Nico situation and more movement expected, I'm with you. I just think one of these guys is going to be gone next week.
Yeah, and I think there's a conversation that he has with all three of these guys, whether it's independent or as a group. I would imagine it's independent, just kind of letting them know where he stands. Now, it's probably really just letting the guy who's third know that he's third, because I think that there probably still needs to be at least the illusion of a competition going into fall camp, whether one exists or not, and there very well could still be one that exists. But I think Marcus Freeman said that not only when he said he'd ideally have a two-horse race, but that they needed to be honest with their quarterbacks or something along the lines of that. They needed to give their quarterbacks feedback, which makes me think that, whoever they're viewing as third in the race, they're going to let them know. And I think what's great about this situation, it's also bittersweet, is I don't think that it's necessarily obvious who is third. I think it's pretty obvious that CJ Carr is not third, but between the other two guys, I don't know just sort of where that falls and what other factors might play into that decision based on, ceiling versus where somebody might be right now too.
So at this point in time, who do you think is going to be the starter for Notre Dame when they take the field against Miami?
If you had asked me a couple weeks ago, I think I would have said Steve Angeli, but I think it's going to be CJ Carr. And the reason is every time we've seen him, he's been very good. Anytime the media's seen him, he's been pretty good too. I think we can say that. And I think that his ceiling is the highest, and he gives Notre Dame the best chance to win that ball game. And that's sort of what Marcus Freeman has done, is gone in with guys who he believes gives Notre Dame the best chance to win the ball game. And I think that that's probably going to be CJ Carr.
Going into the spring, I said CJ Carr and Steve Angeli were going to be neck and neck, and that Steve Angeli's experience would ultimately be the deciding factor for him to start against Miami and most likely against Texas A&M in what I believe is week 2, but week 3 maybe, because Notre Dame plays week 0. I don't know. Either way, Notre Dame's first 2 games, Miami and Texas A&M. I thought Steve Angeli would get the first crack at it, but the more you see CJ Carr, man, he just brings something different to the table. Yeah. And so does Kenny Minchey. Like, his running ability is very important. It's very impressive, and I think he's a really talented passer as well. It's so hard to differentiate between these guys, especially considering how little we've seen. We've obviously seen the most when it comes to Steve Angeli because he's coming in garbage time and he started that bowl game a couple years ago. But it just seems so razor thin based on what we've seen. But obviously the coaching staff has seen a whole lot more than us. And, I am leaning towards CJ Carr starting that game against Miami, which is, it felt inevitable, right? Like the CJ Carr era was going to start eventually, but, maybe it's going to start a little bit sooner than we expected.
Yeah, and I guess that's a good thing, right? I'd rather take this than have somebody not pan out, but it's definitely a position that we seem like we're in that Notre Dame fans haven't really been in with a young quarterback in a long time.
All right, Luke is going to be right back here with us in a moment so we can break down which players made the biggest jump on the depth chart after spring practice. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about Game Time. There is nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every single moment feels huge. It is electric in the arena, and with Game Time, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. Here's why I use Game Time. So the last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, you name it. Plus, the all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time and download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The quarterbacks were not the only top performers in this game. I want to talk about some other guys who really stood out, and this isn't just like, let's talk about the guys who played the best. I want to ask you who you think are, like, this guy will matter in the fall. Some guys who you saw perform really well during the spring game or throughout spring practice that maybe you didn't have super high expectations for going into the spring, but they have certainly changed your perception and have pretty much earned a spot on the field in some capacity when Notre Dame starts the 2025 season.
Yeah, so there's three guys, all from the secondary, that I just didn't really know what to expect from them. Carson Hobbs, I think there was a thought that maybe he could be something this year. And then you kind of start to hear him talk about himself and how he's, tests better than everybody. He's super fast. And then you start to see the practice reports and he's all over the place. And you watch the spring game, he's breaking up passes left and right. Another guy, very full of himself, not full of himself, very sure of himself. Tay Johnson saying he was rangier than Xavier Watts, who, was just a unanimous All-American the last 2 years and the National Defensive Player of the Year. Probably best Notre Dame defensive back in the last quarter century, but hey, that's all right. He had some pretty good practices as well from all accounts. So that's another guy that, I don't even know if he's going to be playing that much in the rotation, but he'll definitely be a core special teams guy. And in that same vein, Ben Minnick was a guy who I thought would honestly hit the portal after this spring, and maybe he still will, right? Like it's a loaded room at safety and the secondary in general, but I think he had a really strong spring. He had a strong spring game, and he's somebody that I think we could definitely see on special teams as a core special teamer this season.
So I agree with you on Carson Hobbs, and I think it's important to point out that last year, before Leonard Moore came in to replace Benjamin Morrison when he suffered that season-ending injury, Notre Dame was willing to put him out there for a series along with Jaden Mickey, sometimes to their own detriment, to be honest. There have been times the past couple of seasons where you're like, why is Notre Dame running out there with both of their backup cornerbacks in at the same time? Jaden Mickey would get a series at different points before he ultimately ended up transferring. So even though Notre Dame is clearly going to go with Leonard Moore and Christian Gray as the starters, they're going to rotate in a cornerback, and I think that Carson Hobbs has earned that backup cornerback spot, and he's going to get some significant playing time this season in a reserve role. And as we saw this past season, guys are going to get hurt. So I think Carson Hobbs is absolutely going to be an impact player for Notre Dame this fall, even if he's not a starter. I'm also with you on Tay Johnson. Luke Tauch has a chance to start, but I think we kind of expected that he'd be in the mix going into spring. Now Tay Johnson is certainly in there as well. I think he's a freak athlete, but doesn't have quite the physical traits that Luke Tauch does. Either way, he's going to be out there. And a couple other guys I want to mention. Preston Zinter, he's the most forgotten about linebacker on the team, even though he's a really good player, had a sack in this game on Kenny Minchey. And I think a lot of us just penciled in Manfremo to replace Jack Kaiser as the fifth guy in that rotation. And even though I do think that Manfremo has a lot of potential, it's probably not the smart decision to just assume he's going to be as good as KVA was as a true freshman, because KVA is a really special talent. So I think Preston Zinter actually has a chance to be that fifth linebacker and play some real reps on the defense this fall, and that's not something I thought going into spring.
Yeah, I definitely think he's talented. That's another guy who, if he hit the portal, I wouldn't be shocked just because that room is so loaded. But you're right. Every time we see him, he shows up positively, and guys like that tend to stick around and tend to find roles for themselves. So that'll be interesting to observe.
Who else you got? Who else kind of stood out to you that you're okay, going into the fall, we're going to have to look at this player a little bit more closely?
Well, I've got one, but maybe not necessarily for the right reasons. This guy might matter in the fall. And that's
he will matter.
That's the kicker, Noah Burnett. And it's interesting when you hear folks talk about conversations they've had with him. He was very good in 2023, all ACC kicker. Last year, he struggled a little bit. And he's been talking about essentially relearning his swing or relearning how to kick the ball. And that scares me a little bit. And many forget that Notre Dame was the worst kicking team in the country from weeks like 6 to 13 last year.
Started with the Georgia Tech game.
Okay. It didn't matter because they were beating the brakes off everybody. But if games were closer, that could have been a real problem. I mean, I don't remember how many field goals did they miss last year? Like 8, 9?
They missed like 8 out of 11 at one point.
So
it's horrible.
They can't have a situation like that again this year because I think Notre Dame's going to be really good. We've said that, but I think the schedule is a little bit tougher than last year, and I don't expect them to go on this run where they're just 40-piecing everybody, 8 weeks in a row like they were doing. So that's something that I'm going to monitor. Maybe it's just spend some more time with Biaggi, feel more comfortable, but he also had one of the worst field goal attempts you will ever see the other day from 50+, but wow, it was ugly.
Yeah, I remember reading a report. I'm trying to blank on who it was, so I apologize to the writer, but they said that they spoke with a source at North Carolina, and they were like surprised that Notre Dame couldn't do better than Noah Burnett in the transfer portal. And it's kind of hard to compare because like Mitch Jeter the year before or 2 years prior, I should say, like he had been automatic at South Carolina. He had only missed 2 field goal attempts in the 2 previous seasons. Both were over 50 yards. And then he was really inconsistent at Notre Dame because he was hurt. When he was healthy, he was much better until, he doinked that one off the field goal post in the national championship. But look, you look at Noah Burnett's stats, he's probably just a 71% kicker because in 2022, first season as a starter, goes 15 of 21 kicking field goals. 2023 has this amazing season, goes 19 of 20, doesn't make any above 50 yards, but was 6 of 6 from between 40 and 49. Then this most recent season, he was back to 15 for 21. So I think we might be entering Jonathan Dorr territory where it's like every time he steps out there, you have no idea what's going to happen. But hey, Dorr came through in the clutch. That's for sure.
Yeah, he also had a leg on him, though, too. He was just missing chip shots, but yes.
Yeah, that's actually true. If Dorr came in and it was like 35 or less, it was like, well, there's just no chance. I remember when you and I were at the ACC championship game back in 2020 when Notre Dame came out. At the time, the score was still 0-0. I think Notre Dame had just gotten it. Yeah, Kyle Hamilton had an interception. They
was
go down
it
the field.
0-0 or 3-0?
I think it was 0-0 because Dorr goes out there to kick it, and you and I look at each other and go, no shot. He's making this. Sure enough, he did it. But I actually have a couple other guys I want to talk about here before we move on. Guys who I think will actually matter. I think Sullivan Absher is going to have a role on this team. I don't know if he's going to be the starter. He came in this game with the ones. He was the starting center. I thought he looked pretty good. I think he had one high snap, but honestly, if you think back to last season, Notre Dame had a lot of bad snaps with Pat Coogan, but Riley Leonard was just 6'4" and a great athlete, so he was able to mask a lot of that. Then when Steve Angeli came in the playoff, you're like, wait a second, these snaps are all over the place. So if Sullivan Absher is able to play center, who knows what's going to happen with Ashton Craig? Because like you've heard a lot of really positive things about Botello and Traore. I just haven't heard that much about Ashton Craig, which makes me feel like a little concerned that maybe he's not going to be ready to go by the start of the season. So I think Sullivan Absher is actually going to be a factor on this offensive line. And one other guy, Kevin Bauman, tight end, in his 6th year playing college football. He actually looks healthy. I don't think he's going to be like a receiving threat for Notre Dame, but I think he is going to come in and block. And good for him, man. I think Sullivan Absher and Kevin Bauman, those are 2 guys who have stuck around for a long time. And I think that they're finally going to be rewarded with some serious playing time this year.
I like both those takes, and I agree. I kind of thought that like maybe Sullivan Absher was a guy that you could see enter the portal, but you kind of forget that Notre Dame already sort of had its offensive line migration with guys already hitting the portal this winter, and you sort of do need some depth there. So he's a guy that I think you're right, likely will stay around here.
He would be the first guy off the bench at 3 positions, left guard, center, and right guard.
Yeah, that's
and
a good
then
point.
Gerby Lambert at tackle. Okay. Any last big picture takeaways, not just on the spring game, but spring practice before we shift to Nico Iamaleava?
No, but just to accentuate the point we made on John Dorr, so I looked this up. It was 3-0 because he hit a 51-yarder, and then the field goal he missed was a 24-yarder. So hits bombs, just missed the chip shots.
Hey, game winners.
Yeah.
He was money.
Yeah.
Luke is going to be right back in a moment to break down how Nico Iamaleava's decision to transfer could impact the Notre Dame quarterback room. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You could track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Let's talk about the biggest story in college football over the course of the past few days. Nico Iamaleava, Tennessee quarterback, is now leaving the Volunteers, and who knows where he's going to end up. But we can at least say for certain that it's not going to be in South Bend. It was pretty hilarious once Nico did announce that he was going to enter the transfer portal, or I guess the reports came out, because I don't think he has said anything publicly. His dad sure has on X. But it felt like a lot of schools like Notre Dame, like USC, like Oregon, they all were in a hurry to come out and say emphatically, we are not interested in Nico Iamaleava. Like, you can cross us off right now. And North Carolina was the most recent team to do so. Looks like they're going to get Gio Lopez, the quarterback from South Alabama. But what are your thoughts on this situation as a whole and what it means for college football?
It's one of the worst just operated or orchestrated moves in terms of just like timing that I've ever seen. I don't doubt that there have been conversations like this going on all across the country where top players are going up to whoever's involved with that gives money in their camps or asking for more money. Probably at most quarterback positions, a lot of skill positions, all across top 10, top 25 teams. But the more that comes out about this, it's just like the Iamaleava camp could not have butchered this more. You try to do this the day before the spring game. Why? It just doesn't make any sense. There's also now news that he almost sat out of the Ohio State game.
He probably should have.
They all should have. They did not want to be
terrible.
in the horseshoe that night. But it all kind of makes sense why Tennessee was so bad that night. And I just think I don't understand the move, because there's a couple things. If Nico Iamaleava is as good as his father thinks he is, then why is he doing this right before a season where if he has the year that he thinks he's going to have, he can go to the NFL draft, be a first-round draft pick? Or two, that's kind of saying that you don't think he's that good, and that's why you're asking for more money, because he's going to have to stick around in college for another year. Because it sounds like part of this deal was a promise for like a spot on the 2026 roster too, which is a whole other thing. And I know Tennessee has some other highly touted guys that are young that probably aren't ready to play right now, but they might want to look for those guys to play in 2026. So just really dumb, something that didn't need to be handled so publicly. I don't think holding out is ever the answer, particularly at the collegiate level. And I'm not shocked that this happened this way, because I just don't think that college coaches are going to stand for this sort of thing. And this is sort of the only opportunity they have to get back at this system that they've benefited from a long time, but now are kind of probably feel like they're being held hostage to.
I, like a lot of people, initially had a reaction that was kind of like, well, screw Nico. Like, what is he doing? You know, he's trying to just basically just squeeze every cent he can from Tennessee. Like, he's a prima donna, he's the quarterback and all this stuff. But then as I read more into the situation, I actually ended up feeling bad for Nico, because it sounds like a lot of people involved here are people around him and his family. He does not have an agent and I think that he's surrounded by a lot of people who don't necessarily have Nico's best interests at heart. I think that they are looking out for themselves a little bit, and now he's put into a really unfortunate circumstance because, like, now some of the top candidates for him are like San Diego State and Tulane. And even Tulane is coming out and saying they aren't even that interested in him. And I think that when you look at how last season started for him, it was great. He comes out, he balls out against North Carolina State when they were a ranked team. They ended up being terrible. And then he ended up playing really poorly in every single one of their big games last season. And he just did not play like the player that most people thought he would be going into the year. They try to shop him around a little bit during the winter portal season, but Tennessee was in the playoffs, so it doesn't work out. And now he's put into a situation here where it feels like his dad, and give credit to whoever helped organize the initial NIL deal because it was unprecedented at the time. He got like the first big bag of any high school recruit. The rumor was $8 million, but it was spread out over the course of 3 years. So whoever was making those decisions for him then or was helping him out obviously did something that was really good at the beginning. But then I think they got a little bit too big for their britches, and they thought they could do it again. The only difference is Nico has actually played college football, and the results have been mediocre to above average at best. So now Tennessee has more evidence, and they're like, look, we already are giving you a ton of money. You have not earned an extra $1.5 million. And then at that point, it feels like that the Nico camp had already kind of played their hand, and there was no going back on it. And now here he is in the transfer portal, and it looks like wherever he goes is going to be a serious downgrade.
It definitely will be. And I think, honestly, if you looked at that deal, like, you're right, there needs to be some credit, I guess, given for getting that way back when. But if you looked at how that thing is aged and what the going rate is for a quarterback now, I think that Tennessee would probably say, you know what, this actually wasn't that bad. Like $2.5 million a year, basically, for 3 years. I think we did okay. But yeah, they really, whenever they had leverage, it was not the day before the spring game. And the fact that this thing carried on as long as it did, I think you're right. Having an agent probably could have sorted all this out in December or in January if just somebody else not so closely tied to the situation was handling this. So unfortunate for the kid, but the dad gets what he deserves.
I do think that this is a big moment for college football because now I think, the players have had so much power, and now it feels like, wait a second, if you have not produced on the field, then, be careful how you play these situations because a team finally said no, which I felt like had not happened up until this point. And yeah, it's going to hurt Tennessee in the short term, but I think long term, this is going to be good for college football so that players who have not earned that kind of money are actually kind of put in their place. And again, it's unfortunate for Nico that he's sort of like the crash dummy in all of this, but I do think that there are going to be some serious implications from this move looking far and wide. But I do want to talk about how this connects to Notre Dame because I do think that there is a potential connection here. Nico is not going to Notre Dame. We know that. But Tennessee has 2 scholarship quarterbacks right now, and they like Jake Berklinger, 4-star prospect coming out of high school, but he's only a redshirt freshman. And I don't think any serious contender wants to go into a fall with only 2 scholarship quarterbacks. So they're going to be in the market for one. And I don't think that they're going to be able to get a proven starter either. Notre Dame has 3-man competition. I don't think it's going to be a 3-man competition after next week. So who's to say that Tennessee doesn't look at Notre Dame's quarterback room and say, hey, they've got a bunch of talent, and CJ Carr's probably not leaving. So that's 2 guys who have been in college for at least 3 years who they might not guarantee them a starting spot, but it would not shock me at all if Tennessee comes calling to Kenny Minchey, who, by the way, is from Hendersonville, Tennessee, or Steve Angeli and say, hey, we're not going to give you $2 million, but we're going to give you some money, and we're not guaranteeing you a starting job, but you have a chance to win a starting job at an SEC caliber program SEC program who is just coming off a trip to the college football playoff. Like, I could really see one of these Notre Dame quarterbacks wearing that orange and white next fall.
For sure. I could see that happening. What I could also see happening is it's not that Tennessee isn't willing to pay for a quarterback, right? Like, we know that they were paying him $2.5 million, whatever it was, over the last couple of years. They could go and find, I don't know, who's to say somebody from like Iowa State, like Rocco Becht, or like who just lost 2 top 100 receivers, or the kid from SMU, Jennings, like one of those guys. It starts a domino effect, and it opens up a Power 4 job potentially for one of these guys that might leave Notre Dame's roster, whether it's at Tennessee or somewhere else. I feel like there's probably going to be a connection to wherever the odd man out ends up, and whoever goes to Tennessee to take that job.
Yeah, for as much as Nico was disappointing last year, like the best version of Nico, which you kind of saw in flashes last year, like it is exciting to think about what he could be if he put it all together. Now, asking him to do that on a brand new team with just a few months to prepare, it seems unlikely, but I would not be surprised if a team that none of us are really considering ends up just making a play on him because they feel a little bit desperate. I thought UCLA might be an option, but then I remembered that Nico's younger brother was actually committed to the Bruins for a long time, and then he flipped from them on signing day, I think it was, to go to Arkansas, so I don't think that relationship is all that great with the family. So I don't really know where he ends up, but I do think that this is a very important moment. I think it's an inflection point in college football with long-lasting implications that might impact Notre Dame this year. But moving off Nico, the transfer portal window does open up here in a few days. I do expect some movement from Notre Dame, some guys who are lower on the depth chart who don't really see a path to playing time this year. I think that they are going to enter the portal. That's to be expected. But are there any moves that you want Notre Dame to make on the aggressive side if they were trying to go out and add some guys to this roster?
I do think they could probably still afford to make a move at tight end, especially just knowing that Cooper Flanagan's going to miss the whole year after tearing his Achilles against Georgia. You don't know what you have in Ty Washington yet either. Jack Larson flashed a little bit in the passing game the other day. Don't think he's going to be a tremendous run blocking tight end this football season. And then you got a true freshman coming in, James Flanagan. So I do think you could use some more depth at tight end. Outside of that, there's not a whole lot that comes to mind, but I wouldn't hate seeing a move at tight end. I just don't know what kind of tight ends are going to be available.
I'm with you. I think they could look at a tight end, someone who's just another good blocker. I just think, putting all your faith in Eli Reardon, who I'm really high on. I think he had an absolutely outstanding spring practice. Pete Sampson, our guy from The Athletic, was calling him a spring practice MVP. I hope he breaks out this year and really goes out with a great final season at Notre Dame. But given the injury history for him and a lot of the other guys in that room, I think that's a little bit risky. So if they can go out and find a good tight end, I think they should do that. I thought initially they should probably look for a defensive tackle, but if Jason Onye is back and he's ready to contribute, I think they're probably good there because I don't think they're going to get anyone better than Jason Onye. But I think, overall, when you look at this team as spring practice wraps up here in a few days, there are a lot of reasons to be really excited about this group or what they can accomplish in 2025.
Absolutely. And, the early schedule is tough, no doubt about it. But this is a group that just won, 3 really impressive playoff games in a row going into the national title game. And I think they'll be poised for it, and a coaching staff that's poised for it too. So a lot of time before we get there, but I'm already getting excited.
All right. That's a great note to end on. Luke, thanks for joining, man. We'll do it again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
All right, that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Reminder, I'm going to be right back here tomorrow morning to talk about Notre Dame's 2 most recent commitments in the class of 2026 and why this might be only the beginning. The Irish are red hot in the recruiting trail, and that is going to continue here over the course of the next month. You can book that. You can also subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and you can even like the video below if you're watching along on YouTube. And if you're feeling extra generous, you're listening to the podcast, how about you rate the show 5 stars and leave a review? I'd really appreciate it. Have a great day, everybody. See you tomorrow.